Hi, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the current edition of the Power Room series. The Resilient Enterprise Power Room series, which we are hosting today under the EdgeVerve umbrella, brings together like-minded individuals and thought leaders to discuss current challenges and to consider technology solutions that would help improve customer experience to be able to build resilient businesses while we emerge out of these current turbulent times that we are facing, and also to prepare and be ready for any unfortunate events that may happen in the future. Over the course of the next hour, we'll explore how enterprises have had to rethink their global supply chain models, assess opportunities for continued growth, and create strategies for functioning well in the new normal. During this particular Power Room series, we will in-depth go through how to break linear dependencies created by traditional value chains, how to eliminate supply chain inefficiencies with intelligent demand sensing and near real-time channel visibility, and also unlock supply chain potential by leveraging multi-enterprise value networks. Joining me today are Praveen Kombial, who's the Global Product Head for Business Applications at EdgeVerve, and Ertan Aribasak, who's from PwC, based out of Singapore, and responsible for supply chain transparency and partnerships at PwC. The keynote address will be provided by Praveen, post which we will have a panel discussion, and then we will leave about 10 to 15 minutes in the end for any questions that the audience may have. Over to you, Praveen, for the keynote address.
Thank you, Hermes, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As part of these Power Room series, I'm just going to start by sharing a few slides. I promise not too much. Hermes, can you please confirm you're able to see my slide?
Yes, Praveen, I can.
Lovely. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk today about a bit about building multi-enterprise value networks with focus on growth and in markets, particularly in the APAC markets. We're very excited to also have Ertan on the panel with us, and Ertan will talk to a number of transformation challenges and successes that he's been seeing, particularly in the region with PwC, right? So let's talk supply chain. Isn't it fantastic how supply chain has come back to be the center of everything? The importance of supply chain has just grown so much manifold, right? And there is a heightened relevance, and particularly in the APAC region and the SIA region, the number of people who have come up online, estimates study of that economy study that was done, was that almost 40 million more people across Southeast Asia have come online for the first time. And that's an amazing number. And particularly, they expect that almost 90+% of them are expected to stay online in the future beyond the pandemic as well. So clearly, this is one of the biggest irreversible trends. There's also been a lot of product explosion globally. And interestingly, going online helps you drive better products or create more products in the sense because you think you can reach a smaller sub-segment of the market, a niche market, etc. Right? So there has been product explosion. Our retail mix is changing. Interestingly, globally, we're seeing in some of the more developed markets that subscriptions of consumer products have been ramping up and staying stable post-pandemic time as well. But those classic challenges have out of stocks and classic supply chain fulfillment challenges have only got more accentuated given the complexity. Let's look at the complexity, right? What have we added on as complexity over the last decade? We said that we want to design anywhere, build anywhere, sell anywhere, right? And look at our manufacturing world. We have outsourced globally. In fact, the world's outsourced so much more to the Asia Pacific region, and we have got many more demand points, points of sale. We have retailers. We have small mom and pop stores, particularly in the APAC region, and of course this move to online. So we have demand fragmentation. We have also created more opportunities for us to manufacture with contract manufacturers and so on and so forth. We've added more suppliers, and sometimes not with a lot of control. And of course, the distribution channels and the way the consumers are buying is changing in how we fulfill to them, and hence our distribution strategies are changing as well. So what is this all added to? In some sense, it's this classic VUCA world, right? So there is much more volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in what we're doing. And we believe that the predominant model, the dominant pattern that is emerging of driving the next evolution of supply chain transformation has to be about collaborating, not just within your enterprise, but across the enterprise in a multi-enterprise orchestrated manner. And that, we believe, is where the industry is moving to. The industry, we believe, is moving towards creating ecosystems of supply chain in pockets, creating networks. And these could be regional networks, state level networks, pockets of networks, brand driven networks, etc. But they are about bringing an ecosystem together onto a single technology platform to give you the visibility, to give you the collaboration opportunities, and to give you the ability to orchestrate processes across the network. What is this ecosystem? The ecosystem typically consists of, obviously, our manufacturing partners, our manufacturing sites ourselves. There is the entire supplier angle to it, the suppliers, our warehouses, our logistic partners, our distribution channels, our partner warehouses and stores, and online presence, etc. Right? It's about bringing this whole ecosystem together into kind of one unified platform that gives you ability to do both buy side and sell side of the platform. Now, to many, it might sound utopian. And if you see a lot of our consulting partners and futurists, when they put out maturity curves, they typically put this towards the last end of the maturity curve, right? This is where you want to get to. This is the point of nirvana, etc. But we believe that this transformation has begun today. This ability to bring the ecosystem together is something that new technology can allow you to do much, much more easier than when you were doing point-to-point technology setups between your partners across ERPs and collaborations, etc. And we, between myself, Verton, and Hermes, we talked through some examples today of what we're seeing globally and also what we're seeing in the region, right? So this is not something futuristic. We know examples of where we're working with a confectioner in Europe, and they're bringing all their warehouses and partner ecosystems, partner warehouses, and 3PLs onto one single digital platform and creating an inventory hub. Isn't that a great start point for everything? And this is in preparation for a direct-to-consumer push that they're going to be making in the months to come. An apparel manufacturer in the US has a very interesting use case that they have implemented, and it's already has started, is by saying they want to do bi-directional fulfillment between them and their partners, so that when you come onto a partner.com site and you can't fulfill it yourself, you seamlessly come onto your to the brand warehouses and be able to fulfill, and vice versa. They also want to get across to their partner warehouses and partner inventory in kind of a seamless, endless aisle, if you may call it, to be able to drive that flow, right? So we have a number of examples where we're seeing enterprises have started this journey, one brand, one region, one flow at a time. And if you look at the flows, you can think of it as consumer order flows, if that's what your focus area is. And many of you are starting D2C initiatives. We're looking at many B2B flows. The concept of resilience has woken us up to the needs for being connected to our suppliers more meaningfully, to collaborate with them more meaningfully, but also try and understand your supplier ecosystem, etc. Right? So clearly the industry is evolving. What does this journey look like? And we've tried to put it very simply. We've been particularly focused on the Asia Pacific region for the last decade. We started by building our demand networks in this region and worked with a number of brands in this area. And when we look at what does it take to build a multi-enterprise network into play, we think of this like a few steps. One is about creating an integration, an interoperable ecosystem. An integration has to have the ability to understand the complexities or degree of maturity of your partner's IT ecosystem. This is not just about having a few API connectors and say, I'm ready to integrate, I'm ready to be interoperable. You have to understand that your partners might not have the same maturity you have, or vice versa. And having a digital platform and ecosystem that can integrate with the simplest points of entry. I mean, we get inputs today on inventory and sales, post sales data, etc., literally in emails and attachments to far more mature EDI, API kind of ecosystems. But it's all about creating that partner network, that partner ecosystem, and driving low latency, high granularity data. You got to get yesterday's sales today, yesterday's inventory positions at worst today, or today morning's inventory positions, etc. Right? So it's really about driving that integration to get the data in place. And to be interoperable, you also need to build the ecosystems that can understand each other's language, right? So machine translations, we use a lot of machine learning today to help translate what retailers might have put out into their POS systems to what manufacturers and brands have as part of their product masters. You'll be amazed at the number of hundreds of different ways you could write whitening toothpaste and try and connect that to your product master, right? So you're using a lot of data, and to build that cleansed data and the information ecosystem to start generating insight, that's what integration and interoperability is about. When you have that set in place, it's all about driving collaboration. Can you exchange more information? Do you have better visibility? Are you getting alerts? Do you see depletions? Do you see your promotions that not necessarily being stocked well? All of that is about driving a collaboration ecosystem. And really the final stage is that if you're able to get to this point, you want to really get to an automated orchestration way, right? There are a number of processes that don't need human touch points at every step and stage. There are insights that you can generate that will help collaborate and drive process orchestration. And so that's kind of the whole ecosystem paradigm that we can set up. And that's what the journey looks like to our mind. Very quickly, at EdgeVerve, which is a product subsidiary of the larger Infosys corporation, this is our mission with the Trade Edge platform. We started, like I said, we started about a decade ago in creating a demand network. And we're very deeply embedded globally in about 130 countries and millions of retail touch points that we bring a lot of supply chain visibility today. And we have now morphed to create this ecosystem of suppliers, 3PLs, bringing together the entire visibility, collaboration ecosystem, and bringing the entire digital platform into play. The base capabilities include, like I said, integration, ability to create mini networks, private networks, harmonize the data, search the right ecosystems, and so on and so forth. And once you have this, there's so many use cases that you could offer upon it. The most simple things like visibility, traceability, to more complex order fulfillment ecosystems, understanding and sensing demand, and even shaping demand or aggregating demand for your retailers. There are a number of use cases that you can offer. And if those are just the orchestration or fulfillment use cases, there's much more that you can do with data insights using AI. We're driving a number of execution analytics, trade promotion effectiveness, revenue growth management areas, etc. But it's all about bringing that ecosystem together, the data together to drive those use cases. Some of our design tenets, data at the heart of the network, absolutely. We are at scale. This is not for the faint-hearted in some sense, because look at the amount of data and traffic that you're going to be generating. So you have to set up for being on the cloud on global scale. It's about driving embedded intelligence. It's not about insights for insights' sake. It's about understanding the patterns and driving some process orchestration, etc., and really creating unique experiences for every single private network that you might set up. Right? There's tremendous value that has been delivered across, whether it's just visibility drivers, supply chain fulfillment optimization, reducing out of stocks, and so on and so forth. But really, it's about, at the end of the day, driving a growth agenda and using a multi-enterprise orchestration, multi-enterprise value network to bring your ecosystem together in a digital way to drive value across multiple points of your value chains. This is what we wanted to quickly cover. And of course, we're going to talk more about it with Harmas and Ertan. But Harmas, back to you at this stage.
Thanks, Praveen. Thanks for delivering that very informative keynote address. And Ertan, welcome to the panel. Great to have you on board. Praveen, during your initial presentation, you did touch upon points of having a real-time visibility or near real-time visibility into sales and inventory from multiple channel partners in the chain. I would like to actually direct my question towards Ertan. That specifically in Asia Pacific, we see that a lot of organizations across, let's say, FMCG, manufacturing, pharma, and so on, they really lack visibility beyond their immediate tier one partners that they are supplying to. Ertan, if I may, could you sort of, give us an idea about what are the implications of having that visibility, which really stops just at your tier one partners, and what advice might you have for such enterprises to look deeper into their sort of consumer demand chain?
Of course. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Praveen. First of all, appreciate it to have this great opportunity to be here with you, first of all. Regarding your question, Thomas, if I can give you a concrete example of a pharmaceutical, but also covering a consumer healthcare division, when they have approached me, they said, listen, Ertan, we do have some constraints in terms of the visibility. And the point is not the visibility itself. What they actually meant is customer centricity has become key for us in this region. And this customer centricity is basically driving our supply chain. And also over the last decade, everyone has acknowledged that supply chain is covering a huge and significant proportion of the entire value chain, and have acknowledged that supply chain is actually a major contributor to customer satisfaction and profitable growth, one of the key strategic goals of most of the companies we advise. So when they wanted to look into the visibility, it is the question, or answering the question, how can we leverage insights that we produce on a daily scale to have informed decision-making processes along that supply chain? That also means you need to have the visibility into your channels with your consumers all the way down to understand where does my demand come from. But obviously this demand is an essential piece when it comes to demand sensing on the one hand side. That means basically what's my internal data, what's my external data, what is driving my demand, on which SKUs is my demand right now, in which region, right? Is it predominantly in Singapore? Is it in Malaysia? Is it in Vietnam? Is it in Greater China? It is the question of where does my demand come from and how does it influence basically my entire supply chain. It is sort of a backward scheduling that you have to conduct to understand how efficient your supply chain is operating. So that's the operational piece of it. Furthermore, and as also Praveen gave the insights with his presentation, it is connecting that supply chain ecosystem has become essential, especially in the nowadays, and we call it by now the new normal, but in fact, it is still a huge challenge for most of our clients to solve issue constraints and supply chain constraints with the information they do have. That means when you look at the pandemic, the information that you need to have is where do I potentially run out of stock due to upstream constraints at my suppliers, and the suppliers. So it's not only my tier 1 suppliers that are of relevance for me, it is actually the tier Ns as well that can influence my supply chain, hence cause a constraint for me not being able to fulfill my demand. So obviously these daily situations, and most of our attendees today will not most likely have faced already such a constrained situation. Now, obviously, these constraints also face some level of firefighting. And this firefighting, and this is across most of the clients I've worked with so far, across different industries and even across different regions. There might be different levels of maturity, certainly, but the question is, how can I effectively work on managing constraints in an effective way through collaboration? But as Praveen also mentioned, it is not only the collaboration within your own enterprise, it is the collaboration across your own boundaries, and you have to react fast, right? And that's basically a few elements of why visibility has become important. The information is only the one stage. Obviously, you want to become efficient. You also want to have a level of automation within your supply chain to get answers prompted to you in order to react even faster, because nothing has become more important than speed to market today.
Thanks for that, Erden. And I think the points which you touch upon of visibility and automation leading to increased efficiencies, and I guess thereby contributing very significantly to top line and bottom line growth of organizations, is probably something which will resonate with a lot of the audience here. So let's say if we are now to take this a little bit further and say that these particular demand signals from channel partners, either downstream or upstream, if we're actually able to get that at a store SKU level across multiple tiers of partners, and I'll open this up to you and Praveen, what is the art of the possible for organizations once you do actually, through evolving technologies, have access to such data?
Right. Maybe I'll start, Praveen, and then you feel free to contribute. So combining the visibility with the demand sensing has become a very effective tool as part of the planning process on the one hand side. It is also the visibility drives you to react faster, which links to my previous comment, but it is more about how can I effectively reallocate my stocks across the region where I see demand patterns. I do see a higher demand that was not predictable when we did the forecast, but it has turned into reality. So it gives me the visibility. Where do I have stock available for that demand to fulfill? Ultimately, what everyone tries to do is matching the demand with the available supply and being possible to produce. If we're a process industry, we try to produce as much as needed, right? We try to keep our stock levels as low as possible, and we try to have efficient reallocation processes in place to react to the demand. But the demand sensing also gives you a better accuracy in terms of forecasting. Now, when you look into the planning and when you look into the, let's call it the old days of planning, when we looked into sales and operations planning, so the standard demand planning and then the aggregation into regions, territories, and then on a global level, and you try to fulfill this with your production plans, etc. It is not enough that you just look into a monthly planning cycle, especially in CPG or in FMCGs and consumer products industries, where the consumer is dictating your supply chain. You have to be able to adjust your plans at least on a daily schedule. Some of them, and the more mature companies we work with, adjusting actually right now from a daily schedule into a 15-minute schedule. All right, just to give you an example, a very large fast food chain on a global scale has adjusted their planning rhythms, their planning cycles into 15 minutes, where you look into the restaurants to identify what is my demand coming up in the next 15 minutes to be prepared. Because again, when you go into a fast food restaurant, you're expecting fast food and not slow food, right? And that's exactly where they see their USP in customer satisfaction. But you need to understand what your customer or your consumer needs. And that's a value that you can get through demand sensing.
Thanks for that, Ertan. So, while we pretty much talk about getting these demand signals, pretty much either real time or at least on a daily basis for most organizations, I think the way you have broken it down into saying that, hey, we can even look at this at 15-minute intervals, depending on the type of industry we are in and the type of customers that we service, that actually makes a lot of sense, because there's only so many footfalls that you can have in a quick service restaurant in the period of time they're open, and any way which can maximize the efficiency is obviously going to help. So Praveen, let me just toss this back to you also. What do you feel would be the art of the possible, specifically when we are looking at, let's say, a manufacturing or FMCG or a pharma type organization, particularly in the Southeast Asian context?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are so many examples, and I'll shoot out a couple, Hormuz. But before that, if you take a step back, right, the art of the possible comes with the latency and granularity of what you get. And to get to that, you have to first of all define what are your partners, right? And the most obvious partners, even when you start thinking beyond tier one, as Ertan was talking about, are obviously your suppliers, distributors. How do you get to the market, or how do you get your supplies in? But there are many other partners out there that you don't recognize. Your promotion partners, your digital media partners, your 3PL guys, your track and trace guys, all of them have to be a part of the ecosystem as well. You've got to think of them as being your data generators, because that's how you can get a true visibility into that supply chain ecosystem, right? Then comes the point saying, okay, so if I have defined a better set of partners and I've broad-based it a bit, right? What do I do with it? So then you start defining what's the visibility. And that's when you start looking at saying, okay, what's my product category? What is my speed at which it moves? What is my SKU definitions? What is my market definitions, etc.? And you start creating many, many smaller networks of ecosystems. It is too much to expect that, I'm going to fulfill my entire ecosystem across a particularly large territory, because that's not how supply chains have been set up. So you've got to be able to microwave. But we've seen some great examples. So, we were working with this agro product company in the region, and they moved from an operating model of being a dedicated distributor to being kind of a multi-product distributor. And they said that they changed the distribution strategy, and they wanted a mobile-first approach to get to those distributors and make it easy for them. And we added, something like 1,500 distributors over 5-6 months at scale onto the digital platform. And that helped them tremendously get almost a 60% reduction in the procure to receive cycle for those distributors, right? And it was very important for them because they were pivoting their strategy to get to multi-product distributors. There's another company where we're working with a beverage company, the kind of beverages I like. And they were working in the region, and we've been helping them drive much, much better visibility, again, at that granular low latency levels. And they've been reporting almost a 15 to 20% reduction in stockout situations at the key distributors. And key distributors for them are where they get their 80-20 sales and the maximum revenue generators. So yes, absolutely. There are tremendous examples, like Ertan was also sharing, of how people have realized value. The key is define your partners well, define the visibility that you seek, and then try and bring it together, one SKU, one region, one category at a time. Hormuz?
Hey, thanks for that, Praveen. And I think really hard-hitting examples, especially when you're talking about high interest rate environments and where sort of working capital comes at a cost, distributors being able to sort of significantly reduce their procure to receive cycle, it's more money in their back pocket at the end of the day when goods sell out through this pipeline. Also, a reduction in stock out, like you mentioned, absolutely benefits the brand as well as all the partners supporting it, because you end up not losing customers to another brand, and you're basically fulfilling your demand in the right manner. So, Praveen, you touch upon this point that you need to define the visibility that you're seeking, and also sort of bring in different elements of the supply chain network, including your suppliers, the guys who run the promotions for you, and so on. How can organizations then leverage this multi-enterprise network that we are talking about for really doing effective demand planning and forecasting?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I used to define the kind of S&OP Ertan was talking about earlier, right? When you started getting to a strategic planning cycles, and that's when you made literally the quarterback of the entire planning of the supply chain was the planner, right? And they were yearning to get more data across their enterprise partners. So clearly there is tremendous value to the entire planning process. But if you take a step back, the typical cycles of planning are not really changing that much. They're just getting richer. So if you think about long range planning, that's becoming more strategic, because now you have to solve for resilience, you have to sort for your global footprints. You might be doing some trade-offs from what you were doing earlier to get closer to your markets in your manufacturing cycles, etc. So long range, always there, still there, is become more strategic. In some sense, operational kind of, call it tactical, operational, whatever you might say, has become more granular in the sense that they are now pivoting to being more demand sensing oriented, demand forecasting oriented, and becoming more proactive. And to that layer is the biggest value of being able to sense the shift through external demand drivers that is helping them get a better handle of their demand at a much, much more granular level to help drive better orchestration and fulfillment. And we've got some examples. So, how people are starting to use much more broader ecosystem information, right? This is one of our beverage customers in Africa, and they are starting to bring in van sales into their streaming information that's coming into their supply chain planning ecosystems, right? So literally, as the vans are traversing the region, they are able to understand what is the demand, fulfillment, and the capacity available at different points of those routes. And to bring that back at that granular level as the van is fulfilling demand is helping them drive a much, much better ecosystem of delivery, right? Another example I can think of, and this is in the US market, is that there's a lot of digital, and I'm sure it'll happen in the APAC region as well, particularly as more people have moved online, right? There's a lot of spend happening in digital media. And you start to see stunning amount of data. And we were working with this brand in the US, and they said when they started getting to a district level, which is where the programmatic media spends are happening, and then they started comparing kind of a post-event analytics with how their fulfillment have been. When they were running key digital promotions, they were 16% out of stock onto one of their most primary channel partners, right? And it's tremendous value lost, right? I mean, you can say great revenue generation, opportunity, etc., but you don't know it till you get to that level, because you got to see demand at that micro market district level, because that's where the digital media is being poured. And then they started changing strategy on how they fulfill into different states depending on the patterns that they were seeing, right? So tremendous value for the planners to get to far more proactive sensing and forecasting opportunities with more data across the value network. Thomas?
Thanks for that, Praveen. And I think the sort of targeting that you spoke about, that if you're running a particular, digital sort of promotion, and then your primary channel partner runs out of stock, that's actually inexcusable for the planners and the marketeers as well. So totally agree with you on the benefits that these multi-enterprise networks could bring in. Ertan, if we sort of take into account the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years that you have seen at PwC within this particular space, where do you really see these multi-enterprise networks benefiting demand planners and forecasters? And how can it help them react to sort of events like COVID-19 better?
Of course. I mean, before we go into this particular case of COVID-19, what we realized over the past few years is, with the significant pace, also the evolution of our client's organization itself. You as an individual, when you go on Amazon, Lazada, Alibaba, when you order something as an individual, you expect to know when something arrives. You expect to know if something deviates from the scheduled ETA. You want to know, and you want to make sure that you receive your product as fast as possible. Now, this evolution of all our individuals' expectations is now going to be reflected also in a B2C environment, or apologies, in a B2B environment even. That means you as an individual, when you go to work and you have to supply something from your suppliers, you exactly want to know when, but the same expectation is from your customers and consumers to know when you're able to deliver something. They want to know when exactly something deviates from the plan. They also want to know if there is an alternative solution, and you need to react to these questions. If not, there is a tendency that customers and consumers will shift to another provider because of these additional services that you can provide as a company. So the evolution of the organization into a more digital native generation will become also essential, that we should not neglect. On the other side, when you look into the pandemics in particular, a significant amount, and it has been also reflected in Praveen's presentation, is the shift into a more e-commerce environment. An e-commerce environment has a complexity in itself, driven by its channels, but also by its uncertainties of the demands. And especially with the COVID-19 situation, it has become to an extent more complex, because we run out of supply for certain raw materials, semi-finished products, and how to react as fast as possible to it has been just reflected with a client that is producing on global scale, with a production site also in China, to produce the COVID-19 test kits, right? So obviously they had an unexpected increase in demand that was very hard to fulfill. Now, the fulfillment, so the execution of your plan, is just the one side, but there is a complexity caused by that due to production constraints, due to your capacity constraints, due to your suppliers' capacity constraints. So how do you produce these test kits if you have to make sure that you require certain levels of raw materials, that you require certain levels of semi-finished products from your suppliers and their suppliers? So again, managing this complexity in these difficult times, let's put it that way, has brought the supply chain VPs and chief supply chain officers and COOs to drive more informed and collaborative ways beyond your own boundaries to make sure that we can fulfill the demand as soon as possible.
Thanks for that, Ertan. And in fact, while we were having this conversation, there was a question which came in on very similar lines of, how can organizations sort of have agile production, which basically supports the changing demand signal. So I know that you touched upon it briefly, but if there's any further thoughts that you might want to add, particularly to address this agility on the production side?
Yeah. So if you have to connect the external world with your internal world, right? I see this as two words that need to link together, that need to integrate. The external world is basically my demand. The internal world is how can I react as agile as possible to my demand. That is basically the master question that needs to be answered. So the more accurate you get your demand visibility, the more accurate you can also forecast. And this is not necessarily the long-term or the typical rolling forecast for a few months. This is really going into daily schedules. And that's also the reason why agile production has become core. It is connecting the demand plannings with the new standards of MES, or manufacturing execution systems. How can I connect the external world with my internal world? That is how we have to support changing demand signals. How can we react as fast as possible to it, basically? It's a connection of these two different worlds, basically.
Almost just a quick example here, again,
Sure.
to that question, to Verton's point, is that we know of one OEM manufacturer who's doing this pretty well. If this helps the audience, is that so they're doing a better job on the demand sensing side, obviously. But what they've done, Verton, is that they've been sharing this visibility at a granular level with their suppliers. But then the trade-off that they have sought is that we'll give you this visibility, but help us understand your supplier's supplier. And this is the trade-off, right? So I'll give you better visibility, but help me understand your supplier. And then they're using a bill of material breakdown of what their core supplier is doing to their N-2, N-3 kind of suppliers, and trying to create a better resiliency framework in what might go wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So I thought it was a very interesting way that they've been approaching this problem of how to also incentivize your suppliers, right, to share information. Otherwise, there's this block that's saying, if I share and you think that I'm low on inventory, you're going to go somewhere else, right? So that's the kind of balance that this organization particularly did very well.
I just wanted to add, and then we can close hopefully this topic as well from this perspective. It is, a tool like EdgeVerve is providing you the visibility, the capability to be more efficient. But we also need to acknowledge or appreciate that we do have an operating model around this one as well. It is ultimately an organization that has to collaborate cross-functionally, right? And if you look into the different layers of a maturity of a company, sometimes we face with our clients even challenges on that lower level of maturity. That means the demand planning is obviously better connected to the commercial side of that organization, but is that information thoroughly and ideally real time, if not on a daily basis, being transferred to the supply side, meaning also the production side of the planning cycles. Sometimes there are silos which a tool like EdgeVerve can provide and help to break these silos, right? One of the key critical elements is that we make sure that we are integrated internally, and then obviously get the additional information from the external world to make sure that we have all the information that is driving our business and operating model ultimately.
Thanks for that, Verton. I think what Praveen and you both touch upon really made a lot of sense. It's not just about the types of technologies that you bring in, it's also influencing collaboration and ways of working with your suppliers and your further downstream channel partners to be able to really get this unified view and move to a scenario where, there's efficient sort of collaboration and orchestration all around. So that was really helpful. If I may just touch upon with you, Artin, a little bit more on the order orchestration side of things. And that's because it's something which will resonate with the audience, that most organizations during the pandemic have seen significant out of stock scenarios which have really tested the resiliency of their overall supply chains. Happened across different organizations, FMCG, manufacturing, so on. How do we sort of manage this sort of demand volatility and these out of stock scenarios in case of further unforeseen events in the future?
Right. So if I may just go back to the example, because this fits quite nicely into this topic as well, Thomas. The producer of these COVID-19 test kits obviously ran immediately into an out of stock situation. And this situation becomes obviously tricky if you have to work with governments and have to commit to governments when you are capable of providing the numbers of test kits they are demanding, right? So this demand volatility hit them pretty bad. It gives you also, when you have that visibility though, an opportunity to scale, also long term. And they used that opportunity. They had to react fast. There was not much time of implementing complex solutions. They needed to react fast, and they needed to have a solution that is providing that information ASAP. Which information were they looking at? They were looking at, obviously, what is the demand in the different regions, and how do I have to prioritize? Because obviously with the out of stock situations, they had to make a call off, right? That was basically the order execution part. They had a long list of backlogs that was unavoidable, but on the other side, they were capable to make proper commitments, which was understandable from all sides where the demand was caused, obviously. Because ultimately they need to plan ahead, and the only information which was required for their customers, in that case most of the governments, they needed to have a proper plan so they could plan forward. And with this information that you're capable to provide and take prioritizations, but also the possibility to ramp up additional production sites, meaning how does my transfer plan look like if I have to ramp up an additional production site? Am I actually capable of opening an additional production line in a different location closer to the demand so that we can shorten our lead times? All this information had to come together. But what also had to come together, if you're not only looking into the downstream, but also looking into your upstream, is also, if I would open an additional production line, does that necessarily mean I can fulfill that demand? Is it even worth opening an additional production line in a different location? Obviously, it is a high investment, and you would, as a logical consequence, think certainly it is worthwhile. But if you have critical material supply constraints that cannot be fulfilled, and that can basically only cover your single production site strategy, there is no essential need to open a dual site, or to go into a dual site strategy that does not utilize your machines, basically, right? Where are the constraints in the process? And hence also looking into the BOMs has been critical, but also understanding what are alternative products, what are supplements that we, or subsidiaries that we can use in order to produce what we need to produce ASAP.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks for that, Artin. Really helpful. And I think the example that you gave about using a single production line when there are supply constraints from your suppliers probably makes a lot more sense than going into multiple production outfits. But, if I just say a little bit more on the sell side, and back to this theme of out of stock, which we have seen, Praveen, a question for you. What we have traditionally seen is, especially in the emerging markets, a very sort of linear order fulfillment mechanism, where goods go from brand owners to, let's say, distributors, sub-distributors, stockists, down to retail stores and customers and consumers. Uh, Within this particular scenario, we see a lot of inventory lying at various touch points across all these partners. And it could not just be downstream, the same might be happening upstream also. Uh, could you probably touch upon if you have come across instances of, let's say, a peer-to-peer fulfillment model, within FMCG, probably, which allows organizations to really unlock the inventory potential of finished goods lying in their network?
Sure, Ormus. Yeah, so look, in today's world of online commerce, where people expect instant gratifications and your expectations of delivery, etc., being as quick as they are, we've got to get inventory to chase demand. And it's really about unlocking and breaking some of the linear chains that we have set up and defined for ourselves. And here again, we've seen that creating smaller value networks help, right? And I'm talking about creating, and particularly when you look at our region, right? You have to create smaller regional, smaller micro, networks of your supply warehouses to your distributors, to the retailer touchpoints. And then being able to have a digital ecosystem that says, you know what, I am the retailer and I'm out of stock on something, or I'm seeing an online order that is expected to be, picked up in my store, but I don't have it right now. I'm going to put this out to my network and saying, can anybody fulfill this? And then to have a technology ecosystem that sees the order coming into the network, looks for available inventory in that micro regional network, because that's the biggest thing, right? Seeing near-time, real-time inventory availability, and then being able to orchestrate the order, split the order depending upon the necessity, get the confirmations from your partners, and then to also have the right pricing ecosystems in place to be able to set that off or to be able to settle it at the end of a certain period. And to do that in a seamless manner and yet be able to quickly confirm to your buyer is where the market's likely heading to. We're seeing very nascent examples of peer-to-peer delivery in some sense, Ormus. And they are kind of straitjacketed in the sense today by saying, you know what, I don't want to open it out completely because I've set up operating models like Orton was talking about, saying I've given this distributor Y region, or I've given that distributor X region, and how do I break this out? What is going to be the new operating models and how I can incentivize people or fulfill demand and so on and so forth. So there are trade-offs for the channel to see that I can get faster fulfillment is the incentive to do this. For the brand owner to saying I can get customer centricity and do faster is there. But you can think of all this as great new ways of working, but you have to have the technical and the digital ecosystem and those mini private networks to be able to really drive this orchestration. So interesting days, but early days on this one, Ormus.
Thanks, Praveen. And absolutely would love to see this thought process and these overall sort of business processes and new ways of working really get adopted by a lot of organizations, particularly where we have significantly fragmented markets like in Southeast Asia also. So it'll be interesting to see these networks come up. I'll go back to Erton, and Erton, this time I want to sort of pick more on what you said about the buy side of the value chain. Can you sort of let us know a little bit about your supplier performance, let's say, and supplier risk moderation? Because you did touch upon the idea of, there might be a supply constraint leading to single production sites. And any further opportunities that you see in optimizing procurement costs by moving to a multi-supplier network or actually tapping further into your suppliers' suppliers?
Of course. I mean, the collaboration is an element that also combines the relationships to your suppliers. And having, especially in these difficult times, which has shown, especially for most of our clients, that the collaboration with suppliers has become more essential in a way to not only orchestrate but collaborate with our suppliers and their suppliers. It hasn't shown in the past that much that we were able to process information from our suppliers because our main contact in itself was just our supplier tier one. That means if we hit a constraint, the information has come probably far too late. That blocked us basically, that we had to manage our constraints downstream even faster. With the collaboration, it also opened an opportunity to optimize our purchasing costs. It optimized us to free up working capital in that sense that we can, with the collaboration model, have a closer link to our suppliers and their suppliers. We have more information on what are our payment terms. How can we optimize these payment terms upstream? How can we find a collaborative way that creates a win-win situation? That has been a very important information and collaboration model beyond our boundaries with our suppliers. And it has less become a supplier risk management. It has much more become a supplier collaboration management, right? To find the ideal solutions for every stakeholder within the buy side of each of the supply chains, their sell side, our buy side. How can we optimize our purchase orders? What are the right cycles of these purchase orders? Being conscious of time, I leave it up to here. And if Praveen wants to contribute any additional comments, please feel free.
Sure. Thanks for that, Arjun. So yeah, Praveen, pretty much coming towards the end of it before we open up for Q&A from the audience. I just wanted to touch upon sort of the resilience part of the supply chain and how technologies, especially the newer technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, can help mitigate certain supply risks and build sort of a more resilient supply chain to sort of lead to customer delight. And as a follow-up to that, probably, since we are talking about this in the broader context of a multi-enterprise network, could you also add on some of the benefits that you would then see happening in a multi-enterprise network and time permitting, probably some adoption challenges?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if you take a step back, whether you're seeing it on the sell side or on the buy side, 80% of the data is outside the four walls of the enterprise and supply chains. And the enterprises have tried to bring the data together in an integrated business planning kind of ecosystem. But that has been a point in time kind of activity, right? It's not really streaming. There are external complexities and adoption challenges in the tech maturity of your partner, the varied data standards that I touched upon, the formats of data that need to be harmonized for it to make sense, the governance, the relationships, kind of the frequency and quality, and the ability to really not just do it as just a data generation or assimilation, but kind of a two-way orchestration kind of ecosystem. So I truly believe that an over-the-top digital platform layer that does not require enterprises to rip and replace their existing ERPs or for partners to change their simple to easy to use mini ERPs or digital or smaller applications. You don't need to do all that. You need to create this over-the-top kind of digital ecosystem layer that brings a lot of that visibility data together across your network. And then the use of AI and machine learning to make sense of the data to generate the insights. But at EdgeVerve, what we're doing is that we're trying to create mini applications that solve for very specific data insights that you want to create that help to drive execution. So I want to create suggested orders for my partner ecosystem. And that brings together the whole data that is necessary from the right stores, uses AI, creates that insight, and pushes into the ecosystem to saying that, here's a suggested order. If you choose to accept, it immediately flows into a fulfillment ecosystem, right? So it's not about AI for just generating insights, but to be able to use some insights to execute on it. So we've been doing things like suggested order, post-event analytics, route optimizations, and so on and so forth. So a lot of AI, but point use of that for specific use cases is the way, along with this core data digital ecosystem, that will really drive this end-to-end kind of network value creation, and of course, many benefits to be unlocked. But I'm just going to, Ertan, in the interest of time, again, hand it over to you for your last thoughts, maybe.
Absolutely. I think you raised a very good point. I mean, multi-enterprise networks in itself, Praveen, sound by nature very complex. And this might be also for many of our clients that approach us and are not necessarily a digital champion, as I described, typically the highest maturity. They try to understand how can we start at a certain point in time, even though we are probably not the most mature digital native company. And my strong advice is to start exactly with that visibility layer and make sure that we can start collaborating cross-functionally within our own boundaries, and then starting small with critical stakeholders of our supply chain ecosystem beyond our boundaries. Starting small, proving the value, looking at how can we make sure that also our organization gets more and more upskilled in these new ways of working. How can we make sure that we integrate having a better visibility of our performance management, right? Of our internal performance management, of our external performance management. How can we make sure that the organization is using that information to drive and orchestrate that supply chain, as we said? It is crucial that we start somewhere that brings added value. And we've seen that, and I've seen that in particular in Asia Pacific, where initiatives have driven out of Southeast Asia to say, we need to disconnect, even though we are a multi-billion global operating company, we have to look in an isolated manner in Southeast Asia because the market needs are different, right? So there needs to be, even though there is a global strategy, a global agenda, there are some elements of localization within this region where you need to adjust. And I have also seen, having had the great opportunity to work across multiple regions over my last careers, Asia Pacific is the front runner, especially in this area. And the time is now to react, basically.
Thanks for that, Ertan. Really useful to know. So I would say, Praveen, Ertan, really thanks for sharing your thoughts. What pretty much has come out of the conversation today is, around better collaboration, better orchestration across all elements of the supply chain, be it the buy side, be it the sell side, and obviously using sort of technology wherever possible to also automate these individual touch points. Before we close for the day, there's actually been a couple of questions from the audience. Let me sort of direct that towards you and Praveen. One of the questions, and this is again very, very specific, I would say, to Southeast Asia and to emerging markets, is that a lot of the smaller suppliers, channel partners, they do not have any advanced ERP or tech capabilities of their own. And I know that, Praveen, you mentioned about having over-the-top sort of solutions and smaller bite-sized applications to be able to address this. Would you be able to expand on this thought a little bit more?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And this is exactly what we were referring to earlier, is that you're right, the partners' maturity systems of their applications and the sheer variety is tremendous. And the you can't put the onus on the partner to mature. You have to take the onus to be able to bring in the information as it can be provided, and you have the onus of making sense of it, right? And I'll give you some examples. So, and particularly in the Asia Pacific region, right, when you have the complexities of distribution chains, you don't have as much organized retail while the shift is slightly happening. So you have a chain that includes a lot of distributors and multiple layers, as well as now this move to online. We get data in a stunning variety of data point types and formats. In the region, we get roughly partners who say, you know what, I don't have ERPs. I'm going to just send you a file. I'm going to send you a PDF. I'm going to send you every 3 days. I'm going to send you every day. I'm going to send you every week, and so on and so forth, right? So formats. And then there are more the organized ones who have set up EDIs or API ecosystems, etc. So having the ability to absorb all kinds is very important. Here's a data point for you. From the region, we get roughly about 40,000 files from various kind of distributors and retailers just on the demand side on a daily basis for to get the inventory and sales positions of what they sold yesterday or what they have today, right? And that helps our brand partners get visibility in the region. So the maturity levels are not going to be there. The platform has to have the ability to take in the data and absorb and make sense of it and use digital capabilities and machine learning capabilities to make sense. Armas?
Thanks for that, Praveen. And there's a follow-up question to that there's a significant proliferation of mobile phones and smartphones within the region. Is there a way these devices, which are now pretty much in the hands of every individual, how can they be better leveraged by brands, when their channel partners are using it? And how can channel partners maybe utilize mobile technology to, I would say, source further orders from sort of retailers downstream or customers downstream?
Yeah, look, I think, particularly in the region of what we do, Gordon was referring, right? APAC was the front runner in the mobile adoption technology. And what we very early realized is that you have to build ecosystems for your channel partners, which are mobile first. A lot of our, interestingly, our channel partners on the demand side, particularly the layered distributor side to reach to the vast spread of the region and the population coverage, have been using, they have both the desktop versions and mobile versions, but have got more and more conversant with the mobile versions. And having simple experience layers that can help drive that orchestration is making it very easy. So they are native buyers themselves, but they also become native digital much earlier. And it is again upon us to provide those simple ecosystems, not fancy experience layers, but easy to use and easy to orchestrate, easy to order layers that we have created. And again, that actually, it helps us to bring better, cleaner data, and you don't have to worry about the underlying platform ecosystems. So you're actually simplifying the complexity by having a mobile first agenda of yourself.
Absolutely. I just can confirm that, Praveen. I mean, we also see that when we talk to various stakeholders within a supply chain or much more the value chain, especially when we talk to commercial representatives, they say it's a great solution, but can we also make sure that we can use it mobile? Because I won't be at my desk. And I always say, this is exactly what we try to achieve, because sometimes the lack of information transfer is causing one of the blind spots that a planner might have, right? And the information to get it as early as possible. And let's say it's a win-win situation. Commercial representatives, as you said, tend to have their mobile phones, they tend to have their iPads with them, but they don't necessarily have their desktops or their laptops with them every single time when they're in the field. But entering an order or basically adjusting, and that's also the reason, getting this market intelligence into the common platform that provides you the single source of truth, that has become essential. And it has become essential that you want to go on the fly, you want to see where are my current constraints? You want to get alerted. You want to wake up in the morning, have your breakfast coffee, and look on your iPad or on your mobile device quickly. Do I have any major concerns today that I need to react fast, right? And have less the old school, as I call it, transaction codes over transaction codes to identify where some pain points within my supply chain could lie.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Erden. I think with the proliferation of mobile phones, yes, it's become much easier for even the commercial representatives, as we call them, to be able to share information on the go. And we are no longer in this era of where people were tied down to their desk or had to have access to a laptop or desktop before they could actually start sharing the data. And that's actually reduced the latency in terms of getting real-time data for decision-making and insights. So Praveen, there's another question for you, which is around, sure, this network sounds great and using sort of mobile application sounds great. But can you touch upon any potential ROI that organizations would see out of going down this particular journey?
Yeah, and Hormus, it kind of links to some of the outcomes that you had asked earlier, and I had not really touched upon it. But look, the opportunities in just better inventory utilization, reducing your out of stock, and you referred to the cost of interest in this region being higher relatively, and your inventory, just unlocking that value in itself is more than enough to create the ROI that is necessary for the light investments that you might need to bring in these technology environments. And people like us have also been making easy and driving subscription models and pay-as-you-go models, etc. Right? So that to that extent, things are much easier. So if that alone is enough to help you create ROI, think of what you can do with your maximizing your revenue opportunities. Every single one of them, and many of our brands do have substitution products. So you think you've lost something that was not fulfilled, that has probably gone somewhere else, right? So the revenue opportunities are just tremendous out there. The ability to save on marketing dollars and target the right investments in your digital media spends or your promotion spends is another big value unlocker. So think of inventory optimization as just more than enough to help you get an ROI. And then your revenue and marketing dollars are just much, much better gravy.
Thanks for sharing that, Praveen. I think that's a thought which a lot of the audience will probably go back with about how you can, really invest in a network of this nature just by reducing inefficiencies, current existing inefficiencies in the chain and the inventory cycles, and probably then look at building up on it with further revenue opportunities and marketing spend, trade spend, and so on. So I guess absolutely useful. Thanks for that. And we'll probably open the floor to any further questions if there are from the audience.
I think we've gone about time, but it's been really nice to have the audience continue as well. So everyone.
Right, no further questions. So I guess we can sort of wrap up this session for today. Thanks, Erden and Praveen, for participation, and Praveen for giving the keynote at this. And to all the folks in the audience, thank you very much for your time and for listening to this particular panel discussion and being such a great audience. Look forward to connecting with all of you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.